the Teaching Entrepreneur Association, and today I'd like to choose a topic which is often asked of me, which is all about classroom behaviour when you're teaching adults. People often say to me, do you know what, I've had students in my class who've been perhaps a bit sarcastic or used inappropriate language or were badly behaved, used disruptive behaviour when I was trying to teach them. And what they want to know is, how do we actually deal with this? So I thought today's topic would be all about this. So there are two, as I see it, there's probably a lot more, but two main reasons why students become disruptive or are disruptive in our classes. The first one is what I call inattention. It's where they lose actual focus and motivation for what they're learning. They could also be bored. They're not interested perhaps in what you're teaching. And it could be that it's nothing to do with your teaching at all. I've had students come on my classes whereby they are there because their employer has sent them. I mean, I've even had somebody turn up at my classes where they go, right, I'm here. I don't actually know why I'm here or what you're going to teach me, but I've been told to come along, so here I am, type of thing, which, you know, can be a little bit off-putting. But it might be that they're tired as well. I've also had two gentlemen who tried to nod off in my class. They used to go to London and leave where we live, our local train station, at about 6 in the morning. They used to come to my class at 7:30 in the evening to work through till 9:30. And I think it was just too much for them. By the time they got to 9 o'clock, they were like nodding off. And this also had a bad effect on the other people in the classroom, because they're sort of looking around thinking, oh my goodness, you know, is it that bad that they're falling asleep? So in the middle of the class we did an icebreaker, and I got them up and started doing some, you know, some dancing, and put some music on the whiteboard and got everybody up to sort of try and revive them again. And once they'd done that, they settled back down and carried on working. So there are a lot of reasons why people are inattentive that are nothing to do with what you're teaching, but is purely their background or what else they've got going on in their lives. I've had students that have arrived late. I'm sure we all have had those. And it's about what we do with it. And it can be disruptive in the class, because you're into the flow of the class, you're teaching actually what's going on, and somebody walks in. And what can be difficult as well is when they do it continuously. You know, they're each week they come in late. So another thing that can be disruptive as well is when they walk out the classroom, and it may be they're just going to use the facilities or get a drink or whatever. But if you're in mid-flow, or you're doing a discussion, or there's an activity going on and somebody walks out, it can be difficult to actually deal with. Then I say, so those are the sort of where they're inattentive, they're not actually joining in the class. So then I would have the other side of the coin, the flip side if you like, which is where they are quite what I call attention seeking. So they actually start making sarcastic comments, or they start talking over you, or perhaps having a conversation with a peer next to them in the class. I've also had somebody who constantly was texting on his phone. This is Alistair, and he joined one of my classes, and it was really important that he took on board what we were talking about, because it was not only rude for everybody else and disruptive for other students, but also he needed to pass a qualification at the end of it. And if he's chatting away digitally on his phone, it was I think rude, and not only rude but disruptive, and also the other students didn't like it either. So it was uncomfortable. I had also where students have taken phone calls. You know, the phone's rung and they're sat there chitter-chatting on their phone. You know, okay, they try to keep the voice down and all the rest of it, but they're still talking on their phone, which is, is just rude, off-putting, and just, in my book, not want. they can also offend others. Maybe sometimes they don't mean to, or they say something that's inappropriate and it upsets others in the class. So I can give you another example of that, which was I had a lady who, her and her husband were in a particular political party, and they started talking about how people from the European Union shouldn't be coming into our country and all the rest of it. Well, I found this offensive because not only do I not believe in that, but also because there were other students in the class who were from European countries, and I just didn't think that it was inappropriate or right to make the other students in the class feel uncomfortable. And this lady did carry on a bit, well, far too long for us as far as I'm concerned, and obviously it needed dealing with. So those are some what I call disruptive behaviours, inappropriate behaviours and languages that people use. So there's some that are what I call the inattention, and some that are the ones that are seeking attention. So how do we deal with this? Well, I like, and I know a lot of teachers don't, but I like to have ground rules in place in all my classes. And people again say to me, really, Danielle, do we need ground rules? You know, we are adults after all. But I promise you, ground rules help enormously whenever there is a problem going on of this type in class. So what are ground rules? Well, the way I like to describe it is, if you can imagine playing a football match, there are set rules within the game that everybody adheres to. Because otherwise it would just be complete mayhem. Well, it's the same in a class. So I like to have ground rules in my class, and I set them, some myself because they might be health and safety, or some that I just prefer to have in there. And then there will also be some that the students set. And the reason that we do this is that if we both set the rules, then hopefully everybody takes ownership of them and will obey them. So we get the ground rules out. So there would be things like switch off mobile phones. I mean, I don't mind somebody having a mobile phone on if it's on silent or it's on vibrate, so that the student can leave the classroom and take the call. You know, sometimes there's emergencies going on at home, things that we don't know anything about, and they may need to take a phone call. So that's absolutely fine, but there's the door. Go outside, have your phone call, then come back in and join us. Other things I like to put in there is things like no question is a silly one, that everybody's views are respected. There might be one on about eating foods and stuff like that in the class. All sorts of different bits and bobs that may be necessary in your class. I mean, you can change these as time goes on. You can add to them. Don't ever be afraid to add to them. If there's something happens in the class and the students are not happy with it, or they need a ground rule adding in, go ahead, add those in. So that's ground rules. So I like to have them in place, and I sometimes put them up on a big flip chart, and then I get the students to come in and sign them, so that they said, yes, we agreed to sign up to these rules. And I think that's really important. Sometimes also I'll just put it on an A4 sheet and everybody has it in their files. But whatever, I refer to them quite regularly. And I do find in my classes sometimes that the students will say to me, "Oi, Danielle, don't forget ground rules." And that's really useful, because if they're pulling me up, they're also pulling their peers up, and they are embracing the rules. I have to say, you know, I've not done anything too bad, but it's good that they're there. So those are the ground rules, and I think that's really important to have in place. So what do we do then, in taking it a step further? What do we do when our students are using inattention or attention-seeking, disruptive and inappropriate behaviour? So the first thing I do is actually look at the student, maintain eye contact, and sort of make them aware that something is not right here. The next thing I do is always to remain calm and to figure out here, am I going to make a big thing out of what's just been said, or am I going to let it go? if I've maintained eye contact and the student you can see is, okay, I understand, I've made a mistake here, I'm sorry, then you can just leave it and move on. But if they don't, like in the case of the lady who was from the political party that I was telling you about earlier, this behaviour is wrong. In my classes, I won't accept any behaviour where students are rude, they use inappropriate language, whether they're racist, whether they're homophobic, any of those, and any of the things that are in the Equalities Act, any of the strands of the Equalities Act, or that they talk down, or are just, making the learning environment uncomfortable. I just won't have it, because it's not fair to anybody. So I do those things that I've just said, like maintaining eye contact, I'm staying calm. But in the case of that particular lady, what I did was I called a break. I mean, we'd only been in the class, sort of half an hour, and I called a break. So sent everybody out of the room, and then just quietly said to that particular lady, oh, I just need a word. And I explained to her that her behaviour was unacceptable, and that she'd signed up to the ground rules, and that there were 2 people in that class that were from the European Union, and that it was inappropriate. To be fair to her, she did apologise to me and said that she was sorry and that she wouldn't do it again. And when the students came back, she did apologise to them as well. So we carried on, and everything was sorted. But sometimes it's not as easy as that, and students can get really angry and frustrated and don't see what the problem is. So in the case of Alistair, who was doing his texting, I took him to one side, away from the class, and I think that's really important. You shouldn't actually draw attention to it in front of the whole class, because it can make things worse, and you want to just contain it. So what I did was I took Alistair outside, and I said to him, you're not learning if you're texting away. And I tried to establish the reason why he was doing that. It turned out that he'd got a new girlfriend and he was texting her. So I did explain to him that, unfortunately, if he chose the action that he did and continued to text, that I would ask him to leave the room, and he would have to continue the class at another time, or come back later when he was able to continue with the class and take on board everything that we were talking about. And he said, well, I'm listening, I can't understand what the problem is. And so I had to explain to him again, that it's disruptive, it wasn't fair on the other students, and that it was actually damn rude. So he agreed to do that and went back into the class, and to be fair, he did. He carried on the way he should have been. So it's about explaining to them that what they're doing is wrong, that they have signed up to the ground rules, and on the ground rules, as in the case of Alistair, it did say no mobile phones and no texting. So I said to him, you did sign up to the rules, and it's quite easy to actually do that when you've got the ground rules there. It's quite easy to say, look, you signed up to the ground rules, and therefore you need to adhere to them. So it's about having that private discussion away from everybody else, finding out why they're doing it, explaining that it is disruptive and it's not appropriate, and also saying to them, this is the consequence if you continue to do this. And I do find that most people will say, okay, I agree, and they won't do it. But also there have been times when they haven't, and I've had to say, I'm sorry, then if you prefer to text rather than be part of the class or to take part in the class, then I have to ask you to leave. And don't be afraid to do that, because you've got other students in that class. Alistair was one of 10. It's not fair on the other 9 to have him sat there paying attention, and therefore disrupting everybody else's learning. And then the problem with that is that if I allow that to continue, 2 or 3 others will do it. So there'll be everybody doing it, rather than taking note of what you're actually teaching. So I hope that's been useful, and that it's something that you can take